Good morning, everyone. I'm Isabel Guzman, Director of the Office of the Small Business Advocate. Folks are we'll give it just a couple minutes, but welcome. All right, everyone. So again, Isabel Guzman. I'm the Director of the Office of the Small Business Advocate, which sits within the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. My office is responsible for providing resources and information on behalf of and focusing on the resilience of small businesses and innovative startups, and broadly for the state of California. I'm here for the governor's mission of a California for all, which means an economy that works for everyone, which for my office means inclusive ecosystems and support for all entrepreneurs, regardless of zip code, race, or gender. One of our great initiatives really to help achieve that was the launch of our Entrepreneurship Task Force. And I know many of you participating in these sessions are familiar, but just
Isabel, we lost you. We'll just give Isabel a couple minutes, or a minute, otherwise I can just pick it up from here. Michelle, if you'd like to jump in here.
Hi, yes, this is Michelle. I'm the program manager with the California Office of the Small Business Advocate. While Isabel finds her way back on, and I typically don't do these with her, but I'm happy to share that we have Dilawar Syed on our call, who is the CEO of Lumiata and the ETF Entrepreneurship Task Force Chair, as well as Frederick Gross, the principal at Storm Ventures and co-founder for the Black VC. And then Eugene Johnson, he is CEO of Xyril. So with that, I will kick it over to Dilawar to go ahead and open us up on our conversation.
Thank you, Michelle, and we will have Isabel back with full force shortly. I would also say that we have a number of partners who made this session possible. We will acknowledge them and we'll be engaging them in the conversation as we move in the discussion. So before we get into this very timely and important conversation about access to capital for diverse founders and people of color, and I do want to step back and just remind us that it's incredible how far we've come in terms of building this community. We started out these sessions right at the very first weekend, if you will, when we moved to shelter in place, and every 2 Fridays we've had the opportunity to talk to many of you from all across the state, all backgrounds, all sectors. And I'm a private sector CEO myself, and it's been great to have these conversations, share with each other what we are, how do we manage business in this very unprecedented times, how we offer resources, share ideas and tips. And I hope we can all continue to build this community that will outlast this virus, and certainly hope everybody's doing fine, staying safe and healthy, and especially as we unfortunately see a rise in cases, that you continue to be socially distant and take care of each other. So with that, the topic today is we're gonna again cover some challenges and opportunities that I think are with respect to funding diverse founders. And so we have 2 great leaders who will walk through their own journey and share some advice with all of you. So let me quickly introduce Frederick and Eugene, and then they'll introduce themselves, then we'll get into a Q&A with me, and then we'll love to open it up to all of you. So Frederick Gross, do you want to go first and introduce yourself, please?
Happy to. Well, first of all, thank you to the entire team for putting this event together and creating this space. I think this is a really important conversation to be had right now. And it's great to see the state of California sort of leaning into this and acknowledging that the state has to create a space that's inclusive for all residents and citizens here in the state itself. And that, these issues, particularly that we're, going through as a country, have sometimes a disproportionate impact to communities of color, and that's certainly true right now. So I want to thank you all for putting the space and time here. As a brief introduction to me, as was said before, I'm a principal at Storm Ventures, which is an early stage B2B focused venture capital firm based here in Menlo Park, California. I've been with the firm for about 4.5 years. And then I'm also the co-founder of a group called Black VC, which is the largest Black venture network here in the United States, with sort of a footprint in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. And there's a lot of work to be done there. And I think that'll be a lot of interesting perspectives from that work that we'll be able to bring into this conversation. So with that, I'll hand it over to Eugene.
Awesome. Thank you, Frederick.
Nice, nice. And you stole the words right out of my mouth. I agree 100% with the comments about the state of California and being a part of this this push. And so, and I'll introduce myself. Like you said, my name is Eugene Johnson. I am the CEO of Zyro. Zyro is a SaaS platform that digitizes the restaurant space. So our goal is to make food ordering as seamless as e-commerce shopping. And I am also a brand new, this is new news to Frederick, but I actually just launched a fund to focus on early stage African-American founders who are looking for funding. We're in the process of closing that fund now while I'm fundraising for my company as well, which is a crazy duel to do. But I thought, my number one goal was to try to figure out ways I can give back to the community similar to what you guys are doing here. So, I definitely appreciate the forum here.
That's awesome, Eugene, and congratulations on taking that extra step. That's what entrepreneurs do. And we are delighted that you chose the Entrepreneurship Task Force medium to share the news with the entire state, if not the entire world, that you're launching an early stage fund for African-American founders. What a wonderful thing. So with that, let's start with you. And I'm going to cover your entrepreneurial journey.
Hi, Dilawar. Dilawar, I'm so sorry. This is Isabel. Zoom kicks me off, but I'm back on. So before we go into the conversation, I'd love to be able to just share a little bit. I'm so sorry that the screen froze and that Zoom kicked me off, but it would not let me back in at all. I had to re-register. So again, Isabel Guzman, Director of the Office of Small Business Advocate. Not sure exactly where I cut off, but I just wanted to share a little bit about the, how we came to this point. Of course, we know the challenges that persist around venture capital, and my office is really driven by the fact that, VCs have that $4 trillion missed opportunity by underinvesting in diverse founders of scalable startups. And so, along with that focus, the Entrepreneurship Task Force has been working with us on these webinars. So we decided to launch a new partnership with the Entrepreneurship Task Force and multiple amazing organizations. And I don't know if Joy brought up the screen in my absence, but we have several partners that I just wanted to acknowledge, and that's the ODOS, Synergy Services, Women of Color, Global Entrepreneur Network, the Greater LA African American Chamber of Commerce, the National Black MBA Association, San Francisco Cooperative Economic Empowerment Movement, the Central San Diego Black Chamber, the Black Small Business Association of California, Silicon Valley Black Chamber of Commerce, Fresno Metro Black Chamber of Commerce, California Black Chamber, California Black Media, Sacramento Black Biz, Village Connect, and Go Paladin. And I just wanted to acknowledge all of those organizations that have partnered with us on this series about capital and connections, starting last week on lending and this week on venture. It's really important to our work around equity in the governor's office. As many of you know, in May, the governor launched a task force on economic and business, or business and jobs recovery that I'm a member of. And to supplement that work, we launched a working group on innovative startups recovery. And that's actually how I met Frederick Gross, as I recruited him to join me in that effort, and was so impressed and pleased with his work, along with some really impressive leaders throughout the state, and so glad that he can join us here today, along with Dilawar and of course Eugene. So really pleased to have jumped back in. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but look forward to the conversation.
All right. Well, thank you, Isabel. We'll get back in. This is what you just saw. This is how entrepreneurs roll, right? We just have to be creative and deal with sometimes unforeseen situations. So I was asking you, Eugene, talk to us, if you will, about your entrepreneurial journey. What led you to start Zyro? A little bit about your background, how you got to that point. Would be great to get to know.
Yeah. So I actually grew up in a pretty rough neighborhood in New York City, so a pretty a difficult upbringing, and I got a little bit lucky. So I started my first company when I was 18, And a part of that, conversation was really wrapped around a friend of mine's convincing me to join a company that you basically bought licenses to sell products. And so it was like my first early entry into entrepreneurship. And I went to Oklahoma City for a convention and got lucky and bumped into a gentleman who became my mentor, 85-year-old gentleman by the name of Paul J. Meyer. At the time that I met him, he started the company that eventually became Prudential in New York Life. So he was a billionaire when I met him, and he took a liking to me. And long story short, he ended up being my mentor for my first 5 years in business. And that really kind of shifted a lot for me. It was the thing that allowed for me to kind of see things the way, in a different way from where I grew up. And I took that company. He ended up passing away 5 years into that relationship. By year 8, I ended up selling the company. I grew it to about 800 sales and marketing reps across the country, and sold that company to a friend. And then I kind of traveled for a little bit, went to Africa and Dubai and hung out. Came back and decided I was going to be an investor. So I started investing. Made a good amount of money, but I think my focus, I really wanted to get back into operations. And so while I was thinking about what I wanted to do, I ended up traveling across the country, doing a lot of public speaking events, training, coaching, teaching leaders at Fortune 1000 companies on development and process building and things of that leadership, things of that nature. Ended up writing a book that became an Amazon bestseller. Sold a lot of copies, but didn't make a lot of money. Didn't understand how that did add up. But the funny thing was, I always say the best thing about writing a book is you get to give it to your mom and see the smile on her face. I think that's probably the number one. She's like, that's my baby.
That's so sweet. What's the name of the book, Eugene?
Yeah, the name of the book is called The Mental Playbook. And the focus of it is really the journey that I went on that first 5 years and how he shifted the way I thought. And it's really about like practical principles on how to think towards achievement.
Yeah.
And so I did that, ended up decided I was going to get into tech, and I didn't have a lot of background in tech. So I was going to start a company. And then something told me, hey, this is a little bit of a different beast, even though you got a lot of business experience. So I decided to work at a company called Meraki. That company was about 45, 50 employees at the time that I started with them. I ran the West Coast division of channel enablement and basically selling to resellers on how to sell against the incumbents like Cisco, Palo Alto Network, so on and so forth. I did that for 4 years. By the time I left, they had about 2,000-3,000 employees. So got a chance to see a lot of that growth. And that kind of led me on my journey to Zyro and really kind of what we build with the philosophy of how do we build the bridge between the physical and the digital. And that's really what our focus is today, is trying to find ways to be able to do that. Right now, we want to start in the restaurant industry and digitize that process before we go to other verticals and create that same type of Amazon Go, Pokemon Go, even like Uberist type of approach when you enter the real world.
That's awesome. And that obviously you're serving a lot of small, medium businesses and restaurants. And at some point, we'd love to get your perspective right now with COVID and how that's been, obviously they've been affected. I do want to have a follow-up question before I bring Frederick in. You mentioned you met Paul in Oklahoma. You went to a conference. And it sounds like he played a defining role in your career, if not in your life. Do you mind sharing how did the conversation come about? Because so much of what we do in this industry, especially in our, careers, is about relationships and mentors and people who genuinely care. So meet a random individual, a successful man who ended up taking you under your wings. How did that happen? How did you get to that?
Yeah, a lot of it is luck and preparation, right? Like, so I was prepared for that meeting. I was in the right place mentally, but it was also a little bit of luck. In this convention, it was 15,000 people there. There was very little 18-year-olds at this particular scenario. So they had a party. According to an 18-year-old, this is not necessarily a party, but they had a party. So I was sitting outside and kind of hanging out. And the gentleman, Paul, was sitting next to me, and we just ended up having a conversation. And in that conversation, he ended up communicating to me, or really asking me a ton of questions like, hey, what are you doing here? Or, and at this time, I definitely didn't look like a business person. I still had braids, I had big earrings. So I was definitely the furthest away, but, we ended up talking, and he said, hey, let's, stay in contact. And, obviously you hear that all the time. But he actually called and said, hey, I want to mentor you. And that's when I found out he was a billionaire. I didn't even know at the time that we were talking. He just kind of, took a liking to me. And when I say I was prepared, I was prepared with the right mindset. When he spoke to me, he could tell that I was looking to make a shift in my life. And I was willing to put in the work to do so. And I think that is the thing that swayed him to say that this is somebody that I can definitely work with to push to the next level.
Well said. And the point is, you were prepared. You were there to receive it. And he obviously latched onto it. Thank you for sharing. And I hope many of us will be inspired by that, because we all could use that at all points in our career. So Freddie, over to you. You've obviously done very well, Storm. What has been, and look, we know this, and there are some stats that I tweeted last night that, there is, the numbers are abysmal when it comes to African-American investors in the investing world. It's not even worth sharing, walk us through your trajectory, if you will, getting to where you are, and what advice you would have for folks who are interested in being an investor, especially in the tech space.
Oh, absolutely. First of all, tough act to follow with Eugene. He's got just an incredible background. But I think there is one similar theme, which, we've sort of hit a little bit, which is the power that mentors can play. And certainly my journey is symbolic of that as well, but also around how different diverse communities, when they decide to reach out, can have a lot of transformational sort of impact to help you be successful. And so look, for me, when I graduated, so I was already in a place of privilege. I went to Stanford undergrad. And granted, I grew up low income, like getting Stanford was sort of the golden ticket in my mind, right? Like I'd been told my entire life, just make it to one of those schools and your life will be set. I didn't really, though, to be honest, understand what that meant. And because particularly I didn't understand the value that networks have in life, right? And what a school like Stanford provides is an access to a network ultimately in a community that a lot of people don't have access to. The challenge is those are fundamentally difficult to scale, right? I mean, they're educational institutions that have a specific mandate. And yet, though, it gave me this huge opportunity. And so when I graduated from Stanford in 2014, I actually ended up sticking around Stanford's campus for a couple of years and taking over a nonprofit called Stanford Student Enterprises, which, essentially on campus oversees a lot of this student-oriented entrepreneurial activity. So it's the kind of like innovation hub for students who are entrepreneurial oriented, might want to start a business. They have a number of sort of incubator and accelerator programs to help student founders sort of navigate the ecosystem, but also to just give a practical business skill set, right? And so for me, I grew up in their advertising sort of division and company. I mean, believe it or not, in 2010, 11, and 12, I was selling like print advertising in a digital world in Silicon Valley. And if you want to learn resiliency and getting beat up by small businesses, go try to sell them a yellow page listing for a university campus. But it taught me a lot of sort of resiliency personally, and how to just sort of not know and be discouraged, right? And how to just sort of be that bull to kind of go after things you're interested in doing. But even in that situation, right, coming from Stanford, having this incredible job where I was overseeing hundreds of student employees and full-time employees, I still didn't have the skills or the tools on my own to figure out really what I wanted to do in life. And so I started applying for jobs. I had this belief I was going to go the PM route to become a project manager at a tech company. And I went and got a couple job offers, which is awesome. And I went to one of my mentors at the time, who was the dad of my freshman roommate, a gentleman named JJ Singh, and so a Sikh individual from within the Indian community. And he'd had some success in business himself. He'd had been an investor himself in companies. I'd gone to Stanford's business school. So I was like, okay, if I can learn from this gentleman, there's so much that like I can make sure my life's in the right trajectory. And so I came to him with these 3 job offers, and at different, pay, different stages of companies, different equity offers. And I was asking for his advice because I didn't know how to evaluate them. And he sat there listening to me sort of hemming and hawing for 40 minutes almost. And he came back with a simple question. Why are you not looking at being a VC? Because at the end of the day, what you're struggling with is how to evaluate the underlying asset. You don't understand what's going on in this. And while I can certainly help point you in the right direction, maybe you might want to think about venture, because as I look at it, you are positioned really uniquely to get a VC job. You've got access to young entrepreneurs. You've done work around incubators and accelerators. You've got access to venture investors that have kind of come to this program. And you come from one of these academic ecosystems that has historically driven a lot of sort of entrepreneurial talent. And I sat there and it was an amazing moment, because it ended up putting my life in a completely different trajectory. That one question, that one bit of advice. And the reason I'd never thought about it isn't at that moment, I'd yet to meet a Black venture investor. I'd never saw what that could look like. And that always sat in the back of my head. Why had I not seen this before? And so I went out to go try to get a venture job. I ended up getting the job at Storm, and haven't looked back, and then really positioned myself to sort of work up the ladder. You join the firm as an analyst. 4.5 years later, I'm one of the principals on the team. And again, I think, my career trajectory is really an example of being able to step back for help, find mentors, but still be in a frame of mind where, I can be mentored, which I think is an important part of like the equation people don't talk about, is like you as a mentee have a responsibility, not necessarily to do everything that your mentor says, but to listen and to come back with at least your own viewpoint and insights, to kind of come back, here's what I've done since we spoke. And that feedback loop oftentimes gets ignored or forgotten, which then leads to sometimes an environment where mentors don't know how to engage and how to support. But ultimately, I mean, like my career trajectory has been because of, important mentorship. And even Black VC's journey in beginning was predicated on me looking for mentors who've been more successful in venture, who had built a career further down, and saying, hey, look, I need to learn from my own community what it takes to be successful here. And then I realized I couldn't be the only person asking that question. And so instead of just solving it for myself, why not create an organizational infrastructure that could solve for it from a community perspective? And if I could achieve that, then there were so many other things I could achieve with that community as well. And that's been in many ways the story and the success of Black VC over the years as well.
And we will come to that. And Freddie, thanks for sharing this. And it's interesting. You also mentioned the defining role someone played for you in case of being a soundboard. And I can't help but point out the fact that it's an Indian American gentleman, right? So a person of color helping imagine a very bright person of color saying, you can be this, and why would you not consider that, right? And we will talk about this. What is the opportunity for more collaboration for all diverse communities, right? And some of that is happening in this anecdotal manner, but there needs to be a more systemic response to that, because I think we all have shared opportunities and shared challenges in many respects. Let me ask you a little bit about Storm Ventures, because I'm sure there are people dialed in here who are looking to, for an investor. Tell us more about the firm, what your focus is, what stage you invested, and also, frankly, how do you source deals, especially to people of color, to make sure that they all have access to these opportunities as well.
Right. So Storm Ventures is an early stage focused fund. So for us, that means, we're generally investing in companies at the Series A, though, we do a little bit at the seed, though I'd argue in this ecosystem today, not to get too technical, we're in the post-seed category. So we're investing in companies that have revenue, and have usually found or are pretty close to product market fit, and are really looking to get some capital to help and just to understand what we call go-to-market fit. So finding the right business model that can scale with efficient unit economics fundamentally. And that's where we like to sort of kind of partner with companies. We're B2B focused. So that means, we're not looking to invest in the next Facebook. That's not going to be, we're a little nerdier than that. We like the, inefficiencies that allow the enterprise or prevent the enterprise from running more optimally. And so we look for companies that try to make, other businesses run effectively and more efficiently. Historically, what that means is we've invested a lot in sales and marketing technology businesses, cybersecurity businesses, HR tech businesses. We invest in government technology, digital health. And so a lot of these industries and ecosystems that, technology is still beginning to penetrate, and where there's a lot of efficiency gains to be made. And then I spend personally a lot of my time also in vertical SaaS applications, particularly with founders that aren't necessarily here in Silicon Valley. So whether that's LA, whether that's other parts of the state or other parts of this country, looking to source those deals. And the way, we as a firm source is not so different than any other firm out there, right? We leverage our 20 years of building the firm itself, which is built this community and network to drive deals in. But also we proactively go after different ecosystems explicitly, right? So without a doubt, right, the Black community is an ecosystem we focus on explicitly, but a lot of that is because we work via Black VC. We focus on, helping, European companies through one of my other team members, Pascal, manage the transition from building in Europe and then coming to the US market and expanding their business here. Because ultimately the United States is the biggest market you can do business in. And so we are open for business and we want to, create more pathways for that. And we, obviously also leverage our portfolio companies. We've invested in, hundreds of companies since the inception of the firm. And that's created its own vibrant community that sort of drives inbound. And some of that is the best inbound, right? Because these are people who've tasted and, experienced the product and at least enjoyed it enough that they're willing to, indicate to their friends, go talk to these folks. And so, look, from our perspective, we're constantly searching, we're constantly sourcing, trying to optimize our internal sort of systems. And also trying to think about how do we make sure it's not just networks that drive, right? That you have to know us, right? So even on our website, we allow founders to submit and schedule meetings even without knowing us. So you just have to find our website. You answer a simple form. And if you're within sort of our target area, you immediately get access to a calendar to schedule with an investment team member. And that's something innovative that we thought was important to put out there because we understand that for communities of color, a lot of the times, even though we have a diverse team ourselves, they may not have access through networks that exist already to firms. And so firms have to provide opportunities and spaces for those individuals still to break in and get access. And so we try to think about
what's
that.
What's the website address if folks want to schedule a time or send you something?
Yeah, it's stormventures.com. So if you went on our website, they'll find in the main page, there's sort of call to actions that you can click through to submit and see if you're a fit. Okay. And it's something that we think is really important to have out there in the ecosystem. And so like I said, it's early stage B2B focused, and then we'll generally investing, anywhere between $1 to $5 million in a lead or co-lead position.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks. And let's switch gears and now hear the entrepreneur perspective, right? Eugene, obviously you raised, your seed round. You're now actually launching your own fund. You mentioned that. You broke the news on this session. What was your experience raising money? And we'd love to hear, how did you go about this? What was the role of the network and so forth?
Yeah, so my experience is a little bit different than my buddy Frederick over here. My scenario is I didn't get an opportunity to go to a great college, so I didn't have that built-in network. And I had to kind of scrap and claw to try to find ways to be introduced to people. So even how me and Frederick met, and about almost a year and a half, 2 years ago now at this point. And some others, it was just, hey, can you introduce me to this person? And then I get introduced to this person and I ask them to try to open up the door to 2 or 3 other people. And every time I get one door open, it usually opens 10 or 15 over the course of 3 to 6 months. And so what I had to focus on was saying, okay, who do I actually know? And the good thing is that when I started at Meraki, and I one of the biggest defining moments of me actually launching this business is the fact that I actually took the time to go work my first corporate America job, which was Meraki. That was a big, if I didn't do that, I don't think I would have made it to this point, because that initial network, as you say, was the thing that actually built out my investment network from the jump. The CEO of Meraki at the time and a couple of the founders were on my advisory board when I first started the company. Now, keep in mind, they must have really liked me because I was still working there at the time. So the fact that they know I was working myself out of that job and still work with me, played a huge factor in my ability to kind of move into the next phase of investment. And one of the biggest things that I would say that was probably the most difficult was just figuring out how the conversations wrapped around investments work. Because a lot of it, a lot of it is network, but a lot of it is understanding like who to talk to and who not to waste your time talking to. And I spent a lot of time, I burnt a lot of time trying to get network to people that probably wasn't a good fit at the moment. And so what I had to do is kind of learn how to synthesize my network to fit where I was and what I was trying to accomplish. The big scenario was I also invested my own money. I know that that's a difficult thing for a lot of people of color to do, but find ways, even if you can't invest a big amount, just show that you're willing to do above and beyond, going to friends and family and seeing if they can get something. Because I think that that's a good indication. Like you talked about earlier about the fact that entrepreneurs find a way. Like you just got to find a way to get some early interest, and you got to be a part of that early interest. Like you can't hope that a bunch of people will put money in that you haven't found a way to try to at least get something kicked off yourself. But going back to the network conversation, I think a lot of it has to do with, trying to figure out the biggest thing I learned is entrepreneurs. Other entrepreneurs is really the gateway. Other venture-backed entrepreneurs is the gateway to getting funding. I used to think it was investors, and getting to know investors was the gateway to opening up the door, but it's actually the opposite. When you find founders who have made money or who look like they're going to make money from VCs, and they're the ones doing the intros to that VC, the respect level and the open door is a lot stronger than if I met Frederick at some, events, somewhere, and then we got a chance to, that is okay. And if I hit it off in that conversation, then I would say, yeah, that would be great. But the likelihood of that happening is not very high because everybody's trying to go talk to the investors. So you're one of 30.
And that is spot on. And I agree with you. And I've run venture-backed companies. We raised a lot of capital earlier, and I see how sometimes those introductions that I make for folks who reach out to me, quite frankly, yield 100% results. But I also have to wonder that you have to have access to those founders. You have to have access to those people. And this is where I wanted to also get in is that, so if you're not surrounded by that community, if you're not in the valley, and if you're not, quite frankly, you have hung out with those people, how do you get that? We all used to wonder, how come these same 10 people keep founding the same, a set of successful companies, this so-called PayPal mafia, and it's not like they're the only smart people in this valley, but there is a pattern to it. It's because they have access to the network. So as we disrupt the network, as we try to especially leverage this moment, we're trying to raise awareness of justice and equity and fairness, and economic justice is a huge part of it. And without growth entrepreneurship, we really cannot achieve proper economic justice for all our communities. How do you go and break into those circles where the founder will make an intro for you? You don't have to ping that founder 10 times, but they would say, I'm gonna do that for you, Eugene. How would you do that?
So I'm gonna give you a growth hacking thing that I realize works. This is a very practical step. Entrepreneurs are actually more open to helping than most people actually think. And when I initially went about it, it's just knowing which entrepreneurs to go after. So if you're looking for a specific venture to be connected to, go to their page, figure out who they invested in, who did they put money in, and who their portfolio companies are, and then look at which companies are A and below. Usually once you get into the B, C's, and D's, they don't really have much time for you. But if you look at the people who have raised an A or seed or pre-seed from one of those investors, they're way more open to have conversations about helping intro you. Now, sometimes they want to kind of get to know you to make sure that, they're making the right type of intro. But a lot of times, and I made that same bad thought process, which was, these guys are not going to want to talk to me. But the reality is when I started, reaching out to them, my hit rate was probably 75% of the people who I reached out to got back to me and said, hey, yeah, I'm willing to help. Let's have coffee, let's talk, and let me get to know about your business and things of that nature. So I would say practically, just go after the A's and below and figure out who they invested in and what companies what firms you want to get connected to. I think you'll be able to be surprised at the amount of intros you get from that.
That's awesome. That's awesome practical advice. Go after a certain stage, and I love that you have your stat at 70 to 75%. And if you can sign up your current CEO as your advisory board member, that's obviously amazing as well. How you pulled that off, that's for another day, Eugene. We have to talk about that. But by the way, that also reminds you, we have to celebrate people who have your backs, right? And that I think a lot of times in these times, and it's a divisive time, and we don't often acknowledge that there is a lot of good that has happened too, right? And I'm so glad you called out that there is a bunch of people who would look out for you. So one last question and we'll switch before you open up for Q&A for Frederick. Let's talk about Black VC, their mission. You talked about that briefly, that you started it. What is, for those who don't know what Black VC is, what it is, what's the mission, and how is it helping the community?
So Black VC, the mission is pretty simple. Look, we want to increase the number of Black venture investors in the ecosystem, and our goal is to double that number by 2024. And the reason we're so focused on that is, we disproportionately just don't, have our numbers in this ecosystem, right? Like it's less than, 2% of venture investors are Black today. And less than 1% of venture-backed founders are Black. And our viewpoint is that those are directly linked at the end of the day, because VCs leverage their network so heavily to do top of the funnel sort of curation. And while there is a lot of positive sort of activities happening around, I think the entire venture community acknowledging that there are systemic problems and a desire to diversify the top of the funnel, our viewpoint has always been that one of the areas or solutions that don't get talked about as often has been, it isn't just about supporting founders. It's not just supporting sort of and doing more STEM education to drive more pipeline for large tech companies. That's all part of the solution. But if you don't solve the capital structure component, then you only create opportunities for mentorship and opportunities to sort of enable networking. And while that's fundamentally important, you have to solve the capital problem as well. And VCs have this unique sort of disproportionately very powerful position in early stage tech, which then ends up putting in place a lot of infrastructure that sustains long-term and then sets up the next generation of market leading companies. And so if we can start to solve some of these problems within the venture industry itself, and then that has a disproportionate ability to solve like board issues, because then you drive more Black venture professionals that sit on boards, then ask different types of questions in board meetings that might drive ESG and DEI work top through. And so our viewpoint was, 3 years ago when we were sitting back as junior, as analysts and associates at funds, we were realizing that there was a lot of great work happening, but no one thinking about really, how do we systematically drive more people of color into venture capital explicitly in these roles. And the good news is the venture industry itself had started to open up a lot of analyst and associate roles that just really didn't exist in the way it had before. And it's because venture capital has become more and more sort of central and important to the US economy itself, which has been a big boon to the California economy without a doubt. And so, we founded this group. Our intention from the get, was really about it not just being focused in only one area, because we realize you have to enable communities at the grassroots level in all of their ecosystems to solve these problems, because it does look and feel different if you're in Los Angeles versus San Francisco versus New York. But we could empower and build a system and infrastructure to enable and support it. And so primarily Black VC kind of at the highest level does kind of three things. One, sort of drive advocacy to the lack of equity that exists in the ecosystem. And in so doing, tries to drive attention to the need to hire more diverse talent. Second, once that talent sort of finds itself at a venture fund, we enable the immediate sort of explosion of the networks of those Black investors within the Black community itself. Because certainly if we as a community are engaging and networking with one another, we're certainly making this sort of problem even harder on ourselves. And so we do a lot of sort of ensuring that connectivity exists so that when a Black venture investor from New York lands in Los Angeles, they immediately have a venture community and network from day one, and they can then begin doing the work versus having to go find that network out on their own. So taking a little of the legwork off. And then secondly, we educate our community, because the vast majority of Black venture investors are young. They're still in the early parts of their career. In the United States, there's probably only about a dozen Black principals that look like me. And there's even, there's very few Black partners at funds. and certainly the institutional funds that have been around for a long time. And so we felt like our community really needed to do a good job of educating and helping support each other so that we could get as many check writers into the ecosystem as fast as possible. Because if we could do that, then we enable these Black check writers to be able to then invest in their own community. But they have to get there first, right? And so our focus was around enabling that. Now, if you fast forward today, we're doing all that work, but then we're also starting to think about more proactively, what are the programs that we can be doing to enable more connectivity within the ecosystem, whether that's within the Black community broadly. So that's work that we would do with sort of the Black groups at your big tech companies, so that Black tech executives are enabling and being part of this community, but also making sure Black founders are getting access to our community of investors and making it easier for them to understand, like, okay, I have a, early stage enterprise, company that I want to build in, that does maybe voice in the enterprise. Maybe going to, a Black venture investor who, only focuses on growth investing, right? And writes, $40 million checks, that may not actually be as helpful to your ability to be successful and kind of get capital. And so we try to make it easier for the community to understand who are the right places to go and fit in, given what your company is doing, but also the stage of your company, and help make that whole process just a little bit more transparent, because there's a lot of knowledge that just isn't publicly available, and you have to be on the inside sometimes to see it. And it's certainly our job as a community to help share that information within, communities of color broadly. And so we think of the broader Black diaspora that exists in, tech as our community that we need to be engaging and facilitating. But we always approach it from the context of the venture ecosystem ultimately.
So Freddie, I'll come back to you. I have a follow-up question on this, but let's make sure we give a chance to our partners as well to engage. So Isabel, I'm going to move it to you to bring in our partners for any questions for Eugene and Frederick.
Thank you so much. And this has been great. This has really been helpful to all of the participants. So kudos to all of you for sharing your stories. Currently, we don't have any of our partners online with their hands raised, but we have many of them asking questions in the chat directly. So are any of the I'll just shoot them off from Benita Santra. She wants to know, are any of the funding resources being discussed in this webinar available to non-Black minority business owners? And it sort of feeds off what you mentioned, Frederick, in terms of Black VCs. There's also, and I shared it in the chat, but there's All Raise for women and Latinx VCs. So could you share a little bit more about the broader ecosystem briefly?
Yeah, there's a lot of great organizations that have formed over the last sort of 3-4 years trying to attack a lot of these problems, from a community-centric approach, right? And I think that the thread that pulls all of us together is, it is by supporting and enabling these communities and leaning into them that we solve the problems, right? And they all, create the space to bring allies as part of the solution, right? Because certainly any one of these communities on their own, isolated, can't have enough sort of momentum or authority to speak or move the needle, right? Because everyone's got to sort of come to this. Other groups that exist that are doing a lot of this work, as Isabel mentioned, are All Raise. That's done an incredible job of providing a space for both women founders, but also women investors to come together. And we partner with them a lot because a big part of our community is Black women. And arguably, Black women have an even tougher experience, both on the founder ecosystem and on the venture side. And so, these intersectionality of identities are something we think about and we try to partner with. Latinx VC is a group we've worked really closely with in the early days that's doing really good work for the Latinx community and trying to solve for this. But then, there are groups that have been doing this work for a long time in, other diverse communities, right? there have been organizations like TIE that have done things within the Indian community and have existed for some time. There are organizations that have been created around ethnic, and sort of like nationality that do a lot of good work, and some of which are even, affiliated with government programs that, foreign nationals kind of put forth in the United States. And so there's a lot of great work out there, and the way we have always thought about it at Black VC is, our job, while we are focused on the Black community, there's more that sort of connects us. And there's a lot of the initiatives that we put forth that will be sort of valuable to other communities as well. And so when we talk about the lack of equity and access, we try to bring in the Latinx community a lot in our conversations, because it looks even worse for that community. Even though, that community, is large in the United States from a population standpoint, it isn't getting access and advocacy in the same way. And there is work to be done there as well.
So one question that came up, Isabel, do you want to ask something?
Go ahead and let's answer a couple more questions, and then I'll bring on Charlotta Cotter, who is one of our partners as well.
Sure. There's a question I think is a good one that came in the chat from Stephen Felger, and I'll summarize it very quickly and say, look, obviously this is great. We're talking about entrepreneurship, the Black community and investing. But what about making sure that existing Black businesses also succeed? How do you bring more Black-owned businesses into the supply chain? Without running into, if quote unquote, to use Stephen's word, discrimination laws. Whoever wants to take that?
Yeah. I'll take a stab at it a little bit. First of all, I think governments try to solve for this a lot with sort of procurement pathways, right? And thinking about, providing in a procurement process that's very public, an ability to get an edge, so to speak, if you are a minority-owned business. And, those, I think, pathways and intentions, we can drive a lot of learnings from what's existed before and try to bring that into these ecosystems. I think ultimately, when it comes to tech, it's about actually just, acknowledging that there's a fundamental problem at the early onset of beginning, company formation, which is really sort of the friends and family run problem, right? Where there's this expectation in this ecosystem that you're able to get some capital, but it presupposes you have access to that network and community. And when you live in a country, and I'll speak to this about the U.S. versus California explicitly, where you have a lot of wealth inequality between communities of color and certainly the white community, at least 10 times more wealth in the median white family in the United States than in the median Black family. That means they don't have equal access or opportunity to sort of get off the ground. And so you see, venture trying to create pre-seed and earlier stage categories to help support that ecosystem. Now, if you're an existing company out there, I think it's about, sort of looking at those sort of small business associations, those Black business associations, and really trying to lean in and figure out what programs have already been put together, because there's a lot of interesting opportunities out there that we can utilize. But then also looking at the other government programs in this point in time right now, right? Like obviously PPP, there's still funding in that federal mandated program. And if you can work with a community bank, there's still opportunities to get access to capital. And you really, I think if you're struggling out there as a business owner, this is something you should absolutely be looking at. And we saw communities of color didn't get access to PPP as fast because they didn't have the same kind of banking relationships. They didn't have the same sort of relationships with attorneys that could do it. And I saw it, as an investor, how fast, the ecosystem sort of stepped up to support those communities that had resources.
Right.
And we're starting to reflect and realize that there's a lot of ways we as a community can sort of start to help and support those founders and navigate that. And those resources and funding are still available. So we should all be looking at that, as Black founders.
And I'll just add briefly that one of our entrepreneurship task force members, Ryan Gales, is in the contracting space. He's had listening sessions with us, and we plan to follow up as well with this group of co-hosts to have follow-up sessions on procurement August, where we will take deep dives. We know that Congress is looking at stimulus packages that will lean in on infrastructure. And we want to make sure that our diverse businesses are prepared in California to go after those contracts in the government side and through either prime or as subcontractors. And so we're prepared to do that. I will also flag that ACA 5 that proposes taking down Prop 209 is moving forward. So those are a couple of things just to track in terms of the state of California. I know there are a couple more questions that we might want to ask. One, I know Charlotta Carter, who helped us with organizing a lot of these co-hosts. Joy, can you go ahead and bring her on so she can ask her question? Go ahead and unmute, Charlotta, and you're on. Hello. We might have to move to another question. So in the meantime, I'd like to ask Eugene a question. I was wondering one of the questions is if you could tell us a little bit more about your fund that you're developing.
Nice. So this is actually the first public forum that I've actually talked about the fund itself. We still don't even have a name for the fund, but we've raised a majority of the money already. And the focus is about it is focused on African-American CEO-led companies with the thought process that it really comes from the heart of what happened in politics when Obama became president. One of my biggest things, or my biggest beliefs, is that, when you have somebody reach a pinnacle, and we've had an incredible amount of successful African-American entrepreneurs, people like Tristan Walker and others, right? But what we haven't seen is breakthrough entrepreneurs, people on the level of a Mark Zuckerberg or a Steve Jobs, or even Airbnb founder Brian Chesky, I think his last name is. So what we would like to do is try to create scenarios in which we have this almost like this push-pull methodology where we get people, like Frederick talked about, getting people into the boardrooms, into the CEO positions, making these decisions and helping kind of push the ball forward. So our whole fund is really wrapped around, African-American led CEOs who are looking for anywhere between 10 and 75K-ish of funding, and we want to go early stage, and Frederick mentioned it. There's a lot of people. I was pretty lucky. I had the ability to put money in the early stage, but there are a lot of people who are like me, where the expectation from the VC community is that they put in a heavy sum, or they get the ball rolling a bit further than a lot of people actually can do. And so what we want to do is focus on the early age, or the early stage of investing, where it's mostly where those investors are not investing in the product per se. They're more investing in the person, and that they believe in this person's vision and this person's, ability to actually achieve, which really goes based off of historical background. What have I seen happen before? And if I haven't seen a person like you create a business like this before, then it doesn't trigger a, yes, this makes sense to invest. And so what we want to do is try to fill that particular gap and giving people, access to capital in the early stages to get to the place where they can talk to a storm VC and have a realistic conversation about getting funded. And that's really what our focus is of this particular fund.
Awesome. Thank you, Eugene. Isabel, do you have any other question before?
Yeah, is Charlotta, are you on? If not, I can ask your question for you. She wanted to know how you can get help with your pro forma so you can make sense to funders. Is there financial help with startups that have several revenue streams, SaaS as well as commission and partnership funding? So I don't know if you could speak generally, to where we can get those kinds of assistance. I know from the state's perspective, there are some tech small business development centers at UC Irvine, UC Riverside. I see Scott Brodsky's on this group. Anyone, if you could add anything to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, this is the bane of my existence, is the pro forma and getting that correct. I'll probably lean on Frederick to answer this question, but the one thing I will say is that there are a ton of, and I apologize because I don't remember the resource, but there was a group of individuals, and when I find it, I'll send it over, and hopefully you can distribute that. But there was a group of individuals who were ex-investment bankers who were giving away free pro forma build outs for early stage founders who didn't have the capital to put that together. Obviously there are programs like Carter and things of that nature that could potentially help. But Frederick, I'll kind of lean on you. By the way, on the new fund, if you are interested and you fit that category, feel free to send me an email at eugene@zyro.us. Or if you're looking to, you're hoping to invest in that segment, then definitely, send that message as well. But Frederick, I'll lean on you on the rest.
Do you have any response to that? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. So Eugene mentioned, Carta is a tool that's being used by a lot of founders these days. It's probably one of the best in class sort of solutions, and it helps a lot, right? It'll help sort of demystify some of the process of what goes into it. I'd also point everybody to resources that actually law firms put out. So Cooley has their Cooley Go. There's many of the large Gunderson law firms that specialize in tech have a lot of resources here. And I think one of the things a lot of founders don't realize is actually attorneys help a lot of CEOs with this, these challenges and putting this together. And I think one of the things that I'm always surprised to find is that, Black founders, Latinx founders, they don't often realize that almost all the large law firms will partner and work with you with deferred fees, where they won't charge you until you raise a Series A. And you'll sort of build up a little bit of a, obviously a back charge of bills, but ultimately, are sort of aligned with where your company's at right now. They understand you can't afford the legal service, but they can provide then the support on sort of the, cap table management, getting the performance all set right. If it's metrics you're focused on and trying to understand like what are the SaaS metrics that are important to VCs today, I'd point you to like For Entrepreneur as a website. There's a number of VCs out there that have blogs. There's SaaStr, and even actually on the Storm blog, you'll find hundreds of blog posts that go into sort of what are the metrics and what are the SaaS sort of elements that we look at businesses, right? Because obviously, we look at things like annual recurring revenues or ARR, which, from a finance standpoint, doesn't mean anything. But certainly is a really important thing from a venture standpoint if you're looking to raise money from venture dollars.
Awesome. So we have 4 more minutes to go. One final question from me, which I think hopefully will bring it all together, because we talked about diversity as a whole. I think we alluded to this earlier, that there is a greater opportunity for various people of color, communities of color to come together. I would also say that no one community is monolithic, right? I mean, when we say African-American community, that in itself has its own diversity within regional, age, gender, of course. Many people don't have access to opportunities. And one thing we have to watch out for is that even as we bring people into top roles, they're not the people who already had access, but rather people who did not have access before. So as you think about all those factors, what's 1 or 2 quick responses from you as to how do you think about creating this coalition, right, where we can use this moment to bring people together, various communities, and help each other? Because I think there is an opportunity there. It's very much silos, and even within our own silos, we are focusing on often at times, maybe because of bandwidth or other issues with things that people that we already know. So any good thoughts on that? Eugene, we can start with you first.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think you mentioned that this is probably the most difficult part as being an entrepreneur in this particular space, is that all of the resources are so fragmented. And I would love for us to do a better job at finding ways to kind of do things like this, is, creating opportunities for people to understand where these resources are at. I spent, my first probably year and a half as an entrepreneur within the tech space, not knowing that 90% of these particular things existed. And so, I don't necessarily, I won't say I have a solution, but I will say that for me, I think the biggest thing is trying to create scenarios. I like the idea of everybody having their own thing, but I also like the idea of now bringing it together at some points in time to figure out ways to do something even similar to what Frederick, a lot of what you're doing with Black VC is just, having these events and bringing people together. It feels like networking seems like, okay, yeah, we know network, but like for those who are the heads of these particular organizations or who work within these organizations, we got to fight to not just develop our organization, but develop a community that all of these organizations sit within to give everybody access and understand that these things are available. I wish I had a solution for it, but it's something that has been difficult for me, as an entrepreneur, trying to find these resources.
Awesome. Your 60-second response, Frederick.
Yes, obviously. So I think, one of the challenges, and I think what we have to make sure we're not doing, is reinventing the wheel constantly, right? I think we have to leverage and look to all these different communities and say what's worked, what hasn't, so we can kind of partner. And I think there are a lot of initiatives that at the end of the day, if done well, will benefit all these communities. And there needs to be more partnership behind some of those, right? So, in some ways, right, there are certainly conversations around like the unique challenges of being a Black founder trying to raise money. But there are a lot of parts about raising money that are the same, irrespective of, which minority demographic you're coming from, right? And I want to see us as a community start to sort of come together a little bit more and understand and pick apart programming and say, here are the things we should do. I'm hopeful that will ultimately get driven by the funders of these nonprofits and these organizations. I think we as a community need to sort of force ourselves to come together to the table, but a lot of the funding is actually coming from the same groups that are going after, which is incredible, which is good. But as we think about like even the state of California continuing to fund and support these communities, how do we use that funding as a way to say, look, we need to be more efficient with that use. Let's not have 5 different communities build the exact same thing and then fund it. Instead, let's have one system get built that works. Let's add flavors that are unique to these different communities so we can sort of, designate that and still create a unique space, but then use the rest of those dollars to create exponential gains, right?
Awesome.
Whether that's driving that to fund managers or anything else.
Okay. Thank you, Frederick. Thank you again, Eugene. Isabel, I'll let you wrap up for all of us, please.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's been really an honor to be able to host these sessions and diving deep into communities of color and focusing on the challenges and the barriers, but really featuring some amazing speakers that are sharing insights that are applicable broadly. I hope it's been helpful to all of you. We will continue to do this. Dilawar, Syed, and the entire Entrepreneurship Task Force is committed to these sessions and to really reaching out and expanding this as we move forward into broader communities as well. So we appreciate your participation and we welcome follow-up questions. You can always reach my office at osba@business.ca.gov as we are here for you as well.
Thank you all.
Thank you for having us.